Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 15th Ako Para sa Bata, I Am for the Child conference. I am Jason Barlaan, the co-chair of Ako Para sa Bata Session 4, and I will be your pre-webinar host. Child Protection Network Foundation is celebrating its 15th year of the Ako Para sa Bata conference, a continuing education for individuals and professionals in the front line of child protection work. Ako Para sa Bata 2023 with the theme Usapang Lusog Isip, Mental Health para sa Bata. This is presented by the Australian Aid, UNICEF, and the Child Protection Network Foundation. And we are glad that you could join us. We hope that you attend and complete all the 7 Ako Para sa Bata 2023 sessions. So let's officially begin. Allow me to introduce to you the moderator of the Ako Para sa Bata, Session 4. She has been in clinical and psychological practice for almost 20 years. As a registered psychologist in private practice, she continues to do psychotherapy with children, adolescents, and adults. Her psychological career has included working in a private group practice and in hospital settings, providing psychological services and clinical supervision. She also consults with schools and companies as needed for various topics, needing specialized input from a psychologist. She is a member of the Psychological Association of the Philippines and a certified specialist in clinical psychology. She's also a board member of the Philippine Association for Child and Play Therapy, a certified practitioner of reality therapy, choice theory, and the founding member of the William Glasser Institute of the Philippines. In doing research, her interest spans topics related to the practice of clinical psychology, as well as focusing on children in various difficult circumstances. So the moderator of Ako Para sa Bata Session 4, usapin ng stress at trauma ng mga kabataan, may magagawa nga ba? Understanding Children's Stress and Trauma. Let us all welcome Ms. Araceli Balahadia Alcala, PhD candidate, RPSY. Over to you, Ms. Lala. Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, our dear Ako Para sa Bata community. Again, I am Lala, and I am one with you in pledging Ako Para sa Bata. On behalf of the Australian Aid, UNICEF, and the Child Protection Network Foundation, we are deeply grateful for your support. So the session, usapin ng stress at trauma ng mga kabataan, may magagawa nga ba? Understanding Children's Stress and Trauma focuses on the current issues on children's trauma in situations of abuse and exploitation, online exposures, and impending armed conflicts. As trauma manifests in many ways, children are no exception. With limited or without the language to call for help, they are most vulnerable. Thus, service providers should be equipped with the appropriate understanding and evidence-based interventions to impede the occurrence of clinical trauma. Specifically, our resource persons will discuss complex trauma, explain the significant increase in the number of grave violations against children in situations of armed conflict, and how they can be given protection, and discuss how we can respond to the alarming concerns of online exploitation and abuse. Understanding how Filipino children are being affected by different adverse experiences is an integral part of creating effective and sustainable interventions. So the objectives of this session are to, number one, describe effective, child-sensitive, evidence-based approaches in dealing with trauma and stress. Number two, review various indications of trauma to children's mental health in vulnerable situations. Number three, present relevant and up-to-date issues leading to the development of trauma to children. The learning outcomes include, number one, understand how complex trauma impacts children's mental health. Number two, learn different ways of helping children deal with trauma and stress. Number three, understand how armed conflict impacts children's mental health and the need for special protection. Number four, describe trauma experience of PASAIC survivors. And number five, learn various intervention strategies in the healing process of PASAIC survivors. Now, the program is being flashed on your screen right now. We have 3 resource persons, a national scientist, an outstanding psychologist, and the Deputy Speaker of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority. We will also hear the reaction from a youth representative. Questions will be entertained during the open forum, and we will end the session with a self-care activity. So again, we welcome everyone to the Ako Para sa Bata, Session 4, usapin ang stress at trauma ng mga kabataan. May magagawa nga, understanding children's stress and trauma. We hope you take in as much knowledge as you can. Let us proceed with the first speaker. So a resource person is currently a member of the Deputy Speaker of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority, Parliament of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. She holds a master's degree in National Security Administration and was awarded a Silver Medal for Academic Excellence and a Silver Medal for Best Thesis. She has also recently completed her Master of Laws degree in the Ateneo de Manila University. As an advocate for women and children's rights, she has represented and lawyered for marginalized women in cases of gender-based violence and mentors women leaders in the area of political leadership, economic empowerment, and reproductive health. She is also the founder and the president of Kalisa Action Network Incorporated, a network of women's groups and advocates that advances the rights and welfare of women and children in the BARMM and Zamboanga Peninsula regions. To present children in situations of armed conflict, let us all give a warm welcome to Attorney Liza Masuhod Alamid.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. Thank you very much to the organizers of Ako Para sa Bata Conference, the Child Protection Unit of UPPGH under the auspices of the Child Protection Network Foundation, Australian Aid, UNICEF. I am asked to talk about the experiences of children in situations of armed conflict in the BARM context. I will try my best to provide a comprehensive discussion of these experiences and give a general overview of the challenges facing the Bangsamoro children, focusing on the impacts of armed conflict, not just on children's health, but overall development. Just to give a context or a description of the conflict in BARM, areas of Mindanao and Sulu archipelago were involved in violent conflict for decades, subjecting countless lives to abuse, poverty, until now, dispossession, and uncertainty. Numerous difficult negotiations and tireless efforts towards resolution have culminated in the ratification of the Bangsamoro Organic Law or the BOL. So the BARM, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, is a product of this law. It recognizes the Bangsamoro people's aspirations and the right to self-determination. To further provide context on the conflict in the region, you see on the slide the years where the conflict has occurred. Now, the conflict can be traced as far back as the Spanish colonial era, but the 1960s marked the formal organization of the Moro Revolutionary Movement and the growing momentum for Moro nationalism. The MNLF was formed in 1972. Later on, Peace talks also officially started, and this happened in the 1970s. And in 1976, the Tripoli Agreement was signed by the government of the Philippines and the MNLF. It was the first peace agreement between the GPH and the MNLF. But the negotiations on the peace process broke down when the then President Ferdinand Marcos unilaterally created the autonomous regions in Muslim Mindanao. While the agreement failed, most of the movements and the terms of negotiation started to revolve around crafting an autonomous arrangement within the Philippine state as an expression of the Moro people's right to self-determination. Peace talks continued through many administrations. The MNLF splinter group, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, led the negotiations from 1996 onwards. Yes, may I continue?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. So the negotiation continued from 1996 onwards with the MILF. That's the splinter group of the MNLF. It stalled, however, in March 2000 when former President Joseph Estrada declared a policy of total war that caused the MILF to step down from the peace table. On and off negotiations culminated in the signing of the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro in 2014. It is these tireless conciliation efforts and negotiations that led us to today, with the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region recognized as an autonomous political entity replacing the ARMM, the former autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. So from this timeline, it was clear that the dominant conflict was centered on the Moro struggle. The fighting involved mostly the Moro armed groups and security forces. Next slide, please. Now, the present-day conflict dynamics in the BARM is quite different. It is complex and multifaceted. It involves several groups, for example, government forces, insurgent and even terrorist groups, private armies, individuals and families, and other factors. Now, we are seeing an increasing trend in RIDO, or what we call the clan conflicts. These are the conflicts that involve families or kinship groups, mostly due to land issues, political rivalries, intercommunal tensions, and even personal grudges. There are also drug-related conflicts, shadow economies, including those in drug trafficking, illegal arms trade, and other illegal monetary and barter transactions also cause conflict among different crime groups. And when there is conflict, there's always displacement. That's the difference between conflict, private armed groups, and the proliferation of small and light weapons in Mindanao, particularly in BARM, compared to those in Luzon or in the Visayas. So every time that there is a conflict, it may cause displacement and all the other problems that are connected to displacement. So the dynamics are made worse by the proliferation of these small arms and light weapons, or what we call the SALW, the private armed groups that are paid by political and economic elites. There's also extremist violence, which still hounds some parts of the region. For example, the siege of Marawi City and reported presence of IS-affiliated movements are examples of these cases. So these complex conflict dynamics foster an unsecured environment, one that is continued to be riddled with high poverty and food insecurity levels. There's sporadic and frequent displacement, particularly in areas of Maguindanao, one of the provinces of the BARM, that also pose challenges to the peace process. So the problem of internal displacement in the BARM is also made worse by climate impacts, especially natural disasters, which further disrupt service provision or service delivery by the government and regional development. So how do we situate children in the midst of these armed conflicts in the BARM context? Now, children or individuals aged 18 and below comprise 48% of the BARM's total population. And just like most children in conflict zones, Bangsamoro children face higher risks of injury or death, abuses, hunger, trauma, and diseases in times of humanitarian emergencies. The long-term impacts of violent conflict also affect their development and access to basic services. So there's a total of around 2.38 million children in the BARM out of the 4.94 million total population based on the 2020 census of the Philippine Statistics Authority, and 1.20 of these children are male and 1.18 million are female. Now, there are some specific issues with respect to children in the context of armed conflict in the Bangsamoro. A 2020 needs assessment study reported that a general lack of service facilities for abandoned, neglected, and orphaned children in the Philippines, particularly those in the Bangsamoro. Some of the challenges facing orphans include unstable support, maltreatment, and higher vulnerabilities to radicalization. So this is based on the Children of War, a rapid needs assessment of orphans in Muslim Mindanao that was conducted in 2020 by the Asia Foundation, and based also on the accomplishment report of the Ministry of Social Services and Development in the BARM. Now, the lack of these service facilities also explains the lack of official records on the number of orphans that are affected by wars in Mindanao. An official database from MILF and the MNLF showed the list of some 8,182 orphans as of April 2019, while the MILF's Bangsamoro Islamic Women Auxiliary Brigade, or the BWAB, is working on a partial list with just over 500 orphans as of January 2020. MNLF records largely cover only elite fighters, like you have top 90 or the top 300. The orphans in the BARM are supported either by family networks or home-based or in-center support institutions. The assessment that was conducted in 2020 also found that there is no DSWD-accredited orphanage in the BARM. Now, positively, through the establishment of the BARM, these children are now being given more and more attention. In 2022, the BARM government, through the Ministry of Social Services and Development, reported that it was able to grant financial assistance to about 8,100 orphans in the region. These orphans are the result of the conflict that has occurred in the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao for several decades. 83% of cases of 115 grave child rights violations were verified in Mindanao in 2021. The cases included children conscripted into armed conflict, killed, or maimed. And some notable cases involved girls who were sexually assaulted, abducted, and forced into marriage. And this is based on the 2020 report of the UN Secretary General, as cited, Paano na lang kami, protecting children from violence via direct access to the law needs one key element, the voice of children themselves. This is a 2023 report by UNICEF Philippines. Now, these cases represent some of our children's personal experiences of human rights violations, grave human rights violations perpetrated by both state and non-state armed groups. And these are just the official reported cases and exclude those that remain unreported and unverified. Now, clan feuds put children's lives in danger and affect them in many ways. In December 2021, for example, a widow and her 14-year-old son were shot dead in Maguindanao. The police believed that this was a grudge killing, as the victim's husband and father were also shot dead the previous month in Cotabato City. Apart from physical insecurity, RIDO also causes economic and emotional stress in children and families who are directly involved. Escalated violence also drives forced displacement, affecting neighboring households and communities Barangays, sometimes entire municipalities are displaced because of RIDO or clan war or a conflict that's based on grudge. The source is on Philippine News Agency, a news article on a widow and her son was shot dead in Maguindanao in 2021. Now, RIDO can take children's lives. It kills children. It can prevent children from attending schools and outside activities. It causes trauma. In fact, an intergenerational trauma that's what has been experienced by a lot of us in the Bangsamoro, an intergenerational trauma. It pushes families to leave their homes, lose their livelihoods, and cause emotional stress. The constant presence of conflict and displacement drives protection risks and impacts negatively on the systems of protection for children. For example, in areas such as the SPMSS box in Maguindanao, children sometimes get separated from their families in times of evacuation. Just for information, the SPMS box is a military term or a collective term referring to the contiguous towns of Sharif Aguak, Pagatin in Datu Saudi, Ampatuan Town, Mama Sapano, and Sharif Saidona, where the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters or the BIFF operates and which are vulnerable to armed conflict. So these areas are located near the Liguasan Marsh in Maguindanao. Conflict also exacerbates drivers of child marriage. So we have a high incidence of child marriage in the BARM, child labor and exploitation, and recruitment into armed groups, and further violence and abuse based on a report by UNICEF in 2022. On the impacts of cyclical displacement on children, there's family separation. There are cases where unexpected eruption of violence would sometimes separate children from their families, especially during evacuations. And as to the child marriage, based on stories from locals, long-term displacement sometimes lead to various abuses afflicted against girls. Parents would sometimes marry off their children in exchange of goods. The UNFPA in 2019 also stated that child marriage cases in protracted displacement may be the result of a number of reasons, and it appears to be one of the coping mechanisms of the families temporarily sheltering at evacuation centers. Kulang yung pagkain, and so they marry off their children to get more food stubs that are being distributed by government agencies. And also they marry off their children because of economic instability, the fear of violence, and a felt need to maintain what we call family honor. Displaced children are also exposed to the risk of child labor, exploitation, trafficking, and even prostitution. Children would take up jobs as the displacement disrupted their parents' or families' livelihoods, and some help in farming and sell street food and other goods. There were also reports of cases where children were used to transport illegal drugs. Children in evacuation centers, especially the boys, are also highly susceptible to recruitment and radicalization. Both the cyclical, multiple, and prolonged displacement, either by conflict or natural disasters, or even both, put children in very unstable situations. For example, some specific cases, boys would join armed groups as they experienced a sense of resentment toward the government. Others were mostly dissatisfied of their living conditions and are lured by the alternative income that armed groups would usually offer. Now, there are other abuses and violence caused by conflict and displacement, like sexual exploitation, lack of child and women-friendly spaces, family violence, among others. Now, the poverty in BARM is deeply entrenched and pervasive. For many, it is considered both a cause and a result of conflict. Suffering more are children, as 68% of BARM children in 2018 were poor, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority. The children and their families' scarce resources limit their choices and opportunities, and the effects can be seen in many ways. The health outcomes, education outcomes, including mental health. But one of the most prominent effects is hunger. So 45% of children under 5 in BARM are stunted, the highest prevalence in the entire country. Poverty and hunger are more felt in rural agricultural communities and much more in remote conflict-ridden areas. The child poverty is very high in the BARM. The region also has some of the worst cases of malnutrition among children. Now, while the figures are now improving, children in conflict-affected or conflict-vulnerable areas continue to suffer from hunger and poverty. Reports show that they constantly show or face difficulties in accessing healthy food and education and health services, especially in times of displacement. This is based on a study done by the PSA BARM, Full Year Poverty Statistics Among Children in the BARM, 2020, and from the World Food Program, a self-reliant and resilient Bangsamoro, The Road to Improve Food Security and Nutrition in the BARM, released in 2023. Children's exposure to conflict and violence makes them stressed. It can also have the effect of normalizing violence, exposing children to a higher risk of violence in the community and at home. Harmful stereotypes and prejudice against Muslims also affect child development and self-perception. This is based on the study by UNICEF in 2022 on responses to the protection needs of internally displaced children and families in the BARM. So conflict causes toxic stress and affects children's mental health and social skills. And it doesn't help that we see comments. So during the time when there were conflicts in the BARM, in the former autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, and in the previous administration, when conflict was still present in the BARM, for example, in the year 2000, when there was an all-out war, you can see in the social media, for example, comments that would say, yes, it's okay to kill those children. Anyway, they're Moros, they're terrorists. We have seen that in the Bangsamoro. And I think that's the reason why the people of the BARM feel that they can relate to the experiences of the children of Palestine. And when people would make comments on social media and would say, yes, let's kill those children because they're going to grow up as terrorists and all of that. So it's a form of online abuse of children that affects the mental health of children who are in the midst of conflict. So this is my last slide. Armed conflict has direct and indirect effects on children's physical, mental, and behavioral health. While significant strides have been made in the past years to address these problems, conflict-affected children still need effective and sustainable systems to protect them and promote their welfare. Children affected by conflict can be protected by partnerships, collaboration, and synergies. The needs of conflict-affected children require actions not just from the government, but the whole of society. So we're very thankful we have the Children Protection Network. We have our psychologists and social workers and doctors who can provide psychosocial counseling and other interventions that will be explained later by our esteemed experts here and speakers in this forum. In the BARM, we are fortunate to have a very vibrant community of non-government development and humanitarian organizations. They help us empower local communities, parents, and other stakeholders towards the recognition and promotion of children's human rights. The ongoing political and social transformation in the BARM opens spaces for different actors to come together and draw solutions specific to the needs of Bangsamoro children. So, thank you very much for listening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Attorney Alamia. We move on to our next resource person. She's a full professor of the Department of Psychology at De La Salle University, a registered psychologist, and a PAP certified assessment and clinical psychologist. Her research interests include children and family and clinical psychology related topics. She has led several research projects, including research on OSAEC, or online sexual abuse and exploitation of children. She has published on international and local journals on clinical psychology related topics such as assessment, family, and children. An expert in the field of psychological assessment, she continues to hone her skills and shares evidence-based practice of assessment to students and practitioners in the country. She's the past president of the ASEAN Regional Union of Psychological Societies, or ARUPS, and the past president of the Psychological Association of the Philippines. In 2016, the Psychological Association of the Philippines named her as Outstanding Psychologist of the Philippines for her contributions in psychology as a practitioner, researcher, and leader in different organizations. To present understanding and responding to trauma of OSAIC survivors, let us all welcome Maria Caridad H. Taroja, PhD, RSI.
Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat at maraming salamat, Lala, for the introduction. Thank you for this opportunity to present. Attorney Alamia a while ago talked about children in conflict with the law. I'll be talking about the OSAIC experience. So in 2020, I actually shared in a Ako Para sa Bata conference the risks of victimization and understanding the OSAIC victim based on our study, the national study, which was funded by UNICEF. Last year, I talk about Telepsych platform, the remote counseling for OSAIC survivors. And today I will be talking about the trauma of OSAIC survivors. So this will be the focus of this particular sharing. So let me start by sharing the outline. So it is OSAIC trauma experience, and then how do we respond to the trauma experience. Okay, so my sharing will be basically based on the OSAIC research that I have participated in, the national study on OSAIC, like what I said, funded by UNICEF, the development and pilot testing of remote counseling, funded by the Safer Kids PH, and OSAIC amidst COVID-19 in the Philippines, which I am part of only as a consultant by World Hope International, and then looking into the previous studies on OSAIC and some forum conferences that I have attended on OSAIC. Okay, so I would just like to start with maybe previous slide. Okay, so the trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster, and OSAIC is one such event. And then a while ago, we listened to the trauma experienced by children in situations of armed conflict. So it's really like how we respond to that event. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then there are different signs and symptoms of trauma. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. Okay, okay, so these are the emotional, okay, previous slide. Okay, I'm sorry about this, no? I'm not able control the screen. So can we go back to the previous slide? Okay, so the emotional and psychological risk, these are just some examples. So of how people in general, including children, respond to a traumatic event. So there's denial, there's anger, fear, sadness, shame, guilt, hopelessness, irritability, anxiety, depression. These are only some of the signs and symptoms when people in general, children in this case, experience trauma. What I'll be sharing later on is what happens to the OSAIC survivors. Okay, next slide. So I don't know if you are aware of the law, that there is an existing law which was actually like approved last year. So it's anti-online sexual abuse or exploitation of children. So it's RA 11930. So this is a new law, and this also shows how our government also takes this particular problem very seriously. So for those who are not aware of the law, so I think it's important that we all familiarize ourselves with the law and see what is our role. How can we help, like in the prevention and in responding to OSAIC? Okay. Okay. So next. Okay. So okay. Okay. So what is OSAIC? Okay. Sorry about that. So the OSAIC, what is OSAIC? So online sexual abuse or exploit, this is the definition of OSAIC from the law. Okay, so if we look at it from the law, so online sexual abuse or exploitation of children refers to the use of any ICT as a means to abuse and or exploit children sexually, which can actually include cases in which offline child abuse and or exploitation is combined with an online component. So some people think that it's just like the online, that there is really no touch, okay? This can include, but it's not limited to, the production, dissemination, possession of child sexual abuse and exploitation material. So this is the definition of OSAIC. Again, OSAIC is online sexual abuse or exploitation of children. Okay. Okay, I am trying to, okay. So the OSAIC trauma experience. Okay, so I think I'm moving my fast. Okay, so let me try this again. Okay. So the OSAIC trauma experience. So that I will be talking about the OSAIC trauma experience. Okay. And this is like the profile of an OSAIC survivor. It's not a homogeneous group. This was actually the result of our findings, but if you actually look into recent findings about OSAIC, so it's almost the same. So we talk about different ages from as young as infant to as old as 18 years old. Okay, and then we have boys and girls. Okay, so some people think that maybe girls are more at risk, but that's not actually true if you look at literature. And then continuously, there are younger children that are victimized. And then, of course, there's an increasing number of reported OSAIC cases. In the recent research of IJM, they talk about like 500,000 in 2022 were actually victims of like OSAIC. So they were trafficked victims to produce the child sexual abuse materials. So the number is not actually getting lower. And of course, we know that the digital age is a contributing factor to this. So to sum it up, in terms of the profile, OSAIC actually puts any child, regardless of their age, educational status and family background at risk. Okay, so that's the OSAIC, the profile. Okay, now I'd like to talk about this OSAIC experience and then how it relates to trauma. So when we talk about the OSAIC experience, in the middle, it starts with actually like maybe grooming. It starts with maybe the parents encouraging the children, or the parent facilitating the OSAIC experience. So that's the whole abuse or exploitation of children. And we know that that is already an event that can actually cause trauma. But more than, or aside from the OSAIC experience, the different activities that happen after OSAEC can actually lead to trauma or can also cause trauma. For example, in rescue, the separation from the family can also be like a traumatic experience for children. And then the emotional attachment that child survivors have developed with a perpetrator can also be like a traumatic experience, them being the one that will actually cause to that person to be imprisoned. And then the sense of shame during a rescue operation, especially when there's media there. And then with that, some of these children are transferred to the shelter, to the child caring institutions. No matter how good the condition is, no matter how good the intentions are, the life in the shelter can also cause some trauma for some children. Maybe not for all, but there are certain findings that indicate this. And then while they are in the shelter, maybe trial and investigation are going on. And that is certainly very traumatic for children. And let's say, okay, after some years, they will be reintegrated. So how the community accepts them again after life in the shelter can also lead to some judgment, shaming, and can lead to that traumatic experience. Okay, so in the end, okay, there can be a re-victimization. It's a whole cycle. So the trauma experience does not stop with the OSAEC or like getting them away from, let's say, from the family or from the community. Okay. Now, so what does literature say about this? So when we look at literature, so technology-assisted child sexual abuse, so I wrote the reference as well. What about it can cause trauma? It's actually the permanence of whatever image is actually left in the internet and the reach of those images. I mean, it's not just like going to reach a certain community, but because of the digital technology, wide reach, and the permanence of this. Okay, and then next, so these are some of the issues associated with OSAEC experience based on literature. No, I will not describe each one, but it can really start with confusion and then depression and anxiety as well. Okay, so moving on. So from the literature, so what are the important elements in terms of like helping them, okay, cope with this trauma for the OSAEC victim? So you can see there, the number one is really like building safety. But how do we do that? Okay, so and then if there is going to be like intervention, how will the counselor or the therapist engage? And then you can see there how case management and advocacy is important, and then looking into the supporting self-determination. So this is all based on literature. Now, going back to our research findings, this one, the survivor's perception of OSAEC experience. No abuse is perceived by the child victims. Some, they don't think there's abuse since they think that their customers do not touch them and are just simply viewing them. So sometimes it is actually like normalized, okay? And then prior to rescue, some child victims saw nothing wrong with the OSAEC experience, like what I said, that this is like a normalized activity, okay? While some actually become distressed by the experience, they manifest symptoms of being depressed, suicidal. Several child victims lack the awareness that the rights have been transgressed. And this is actually like more alarming because they see that there is nothing wrong with what happened to them. Okay, so there is confusion and sense of guilt for many children, sometimes they only realize that something bad happened in the course of the counseling when they're already in the shelter. So for them, that kind of the perpetrators maybe, and then the facilitators, most of which are family members, are helpers and providers. So there's that kind of confusion, and then developing that sense of guilt. And then they see the practical benefits as more valuable, and they don't see the transgression, as I mentioned it. And then there's in the Filipino culture, there's that sense of obligation for the family, and therefore feeling sense of guilt when they see this as something wrong, and they will be the one to actually bring their parents or those people who have helped them in prison. Okay, so based on our findings, the greater the grooming of perpetrators, the less the activities are perceived as abuse by the victims. And that's really, like what I said, that is alarming. And then there's a shame and anxiety, okay, during rescue operations, and when especially the media coverage, and then how it is sensationalized in the community. And then the anxiety and depression, particularly the separation from the family. And I think the number one issue here is really the issue of trust. People who care for them also put them at risk and harm them. So the trust issue is one of the issues for OSAEC survivors. And then these are other observations of OSAEC survivors: self-blame, self-harm, the suicidality, modality, aggressive behaviors, and sexualized behaviors that sometimes OSAEC survivors themselves do not report or do not recognize that they are experiencing them. Uh, I just would like to highlight the fact that these are observations of older children. To that question a while ago, um, younger children experience more trauma. I saw the answers of several people, but for many younger children, because they do not realize or they do not recognize the impact, many of them actually do not see the abuse or the trauma. It is actually the older children who manifest the symptoms, who are more traumatized by the experience, but because they're older, maybe they recognize, because they recognize what has been done to them. Okay, so very quickly now, okay, I'd like to look into how do we respond to the trauma experience. Okay, so what kind of interventions can be provided? So I just would like to highlight this. No, from our research, our key informants have reported that assessment of the experiences is very crucial in preparing the children to receive the psychosocial intervention. In fact, we need to know what's happening to them. Assessing the level of trauma is actually important. Okay, so that's an important starting point. And I would like to show you the framework that we use when we develop our remote counseling. So this is the multimodal social ecological framework. So it addresses regulatory capacity, relational capacity, and sense of self. So in providing intervention, so this is trauma informed, culturally adapted, and then also developmentally appropriate. So this is the same framework that we use. But in general, in responding to the traumatic experience, we need to establish the physical safety at home, in the shelters, at school, and then in the community. Maybe all of us need to think, how can we do this for OSAEC survivors? And then the emotional and psychological safety as well, looking into the family relationships, peer relationship, therapeutic relationships. How do we make sure that these are actually providing safety? And trust is at the core of these relationships. And just to share with you, we've developed this remote counseling for OSAIC survivors, a treatment manual. So this is still like in its final stage of like sharing to the public. So this is my last slide. So in using that particular remote counseling, we were able to address the three areas. So there is an improved regulatory capacity, there is an improved relational capacity. So the survivors become more sociable, they started to listen, and then they were able to develop a positive sense of self and the future. So they became aware of their strengths, the goals, and how all of this can actually help prevent re-victimization. Okay, and that's actually like from our finding. So that's, and this is the table of contents of our remote counseling. And yeah, so I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to actually share based on our research findings.
Thank you, Dr. Karing. Let us now hear from a youth representative. Our youth reactor is 22 years old, a third-year college student taking up Bachelor Industrial Technology, Food Preparation, Service Technology. She loves cooking, painting, hiking, and listening to music. She joined the Philippine Survivor Network, or PSN, in 2022. Let's all give a listen now to Gian.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gian. I am a survivor of OSEC. I was rescued when I was 12 years old, but the abuse started when I was 9 years old. My abuser was my neighbor, and I was friends with her daughter. From my experience, the rescue itself was traumatic because I was separated from my family, and aside from that, I was rescued from the school. I was confused about what was really happening during that time, and I was called by the teacher who brought me to the secret room. I wonder if I did something bad or did I upset my classmates. And social worker trying to explain things to me, but I could not hear her and could not understand things. And my heartbeat was fast, together with my cousins and other friends who were rescued also. We were transported to the SWT Processing Center. As we went there, the school, and I felt ashamed of my fellow classmates and schoolmates. I don't understand what I felt that time. My stomach was swirling, and it seems my whole body was so sweaty, and I had mixed feelings. And in that shelter, I was cooperative. I even questioned why I was here while the other children in my place were doing the same thing. Like, why are they not here or rescued too? With lots of question, confusion, and mixed feelings, I rebelled and did not behave properly. I easily get irritated or easily angered, feel hatred, break things, and all things are negative and lots of complaints. Even though the social workers and house parents are good to me. Little by little, I was learn and understand what had happened to me, and I started engaging and opening up my social worker. I started joining different sessions and activities like livelihood education and formal school and a lot more. The support and interventions provided by social worker, the house parents, and even my family helped me overcome the traumatic experience I have went through. Yes, negative events or circumstances that happens to me can lead me to stress and trauma. But I believe this can be overcome with the right intervention and positive support coming from the family, from the social worker, law enforcers, and even prosecutors handling our cases. Being sensitive to our needs and to our feelings and making sure that things are experienced to us repeatedly and patiently. then I guess overcoming trauma can and really possible. Thank you for listening, and that's all. God bless you all.
We are grateful, Kian, and humbled by your sharing. And this is really the reason why we are all here gathered today. May all children who experience adverse circumstances have the same redemption story and have people who will nurture them just like you've experienced in your life. Thank you. Thank you. Let us proceed to the final presentation. Our final speaker is the current president and founder of Mindfulness, Love, and Compassion Institute for Psychosocial Services, or MLAC Institute, a pioneering mental health organization that heeds to the changing psychosocial needs of Filipinos. She brought play therapy to the country, also founding the Philippine Association for Child and Play Therapy, or PhilPlay. She's the author of 13 books that have had impact on Philippine psychology and on the lives of Filipino children, families, and communities. She is recognized as a national social scientist for translating the scientific principles of psychology for the understanding and the well-being of the Filipino people. In her 4 decades of practice and academic work, she was president of the Psychological Association of the Philippines, editor at the Philippine Journal of Psychology, chair of the Psychology Department in the Ateneo de Manila University, led many programs and researches with international organizations, nonprofits, and government bureaus. She has been awarded the first ever Outstanding Professional for Psychology by the Philippine Regulatory Commission, Most Outstanding Psychologist of the Philippines by the PAP, Outstanding Alumna by the CSSP of UP Diliman, and Doctor of Science honoris causa by the Ateneo de Manila University. She is a mindfulness practitioner and teacher, having trained under Thich Nhat Hanh. Presently, she delights in living her senior years at her nature sanctuary in Tanawan, Batangas with her husband. She's a proud mother of 3 grown boys and a doting grandmother. She actively mentors and is an invaluable consultant to the Philippine psychology and mental health space. I am proud to present our next speaker who will discuss complex trauma in children who are abused, exploited, and neglected. Let us all welcome Maria Lourdes Hani A. Carandang, PhD, RSci.
Thank you, Lala, for that wonderful introduction. Okay, my topic is on complex trauma in children who are abused, exploited, and neglected. Before we go to complex trauma, let me just give you a basic framework for understanding trauma that I formulated after 40 years of working on this and as a summary of the work we did with UNICEF, UNODC, UNICEF, Office of Drugs and Crime, where I was the national trauma consultant many years ago. And it's based also on the book I wrote, which is The Path to Healing and Presence. Okay, first of all, let's have a basic framework for understanding what is trauma. Okay, I think to understand trauma, we have to look at 3 basic things. What it affects. The trauma affects our body, first of all. Trauma is stored in the body. So it's very important to pay attention to that and not just think that trauma is in our mind. No, the body goes on red alert, emergency mode. You know, we start gulatin, started easily. It's called hypervigilance. And we are very, very alert and on guard. Our body goes on emergency mode. The hormones, cortisol, and all the stress hormones go up. So the body reacts. But it's not just the body, the mind also. We have nightmares, flashbacks, images that seem to have a life of their own. No, it's called intrusion. So you're doing something, and then the flashback, the nightmare, the face of the perpetrator, the words, the music, whatever was there, intrude as if they have their own lives. Okay. And of course, the feelings and emotions. So the mind, the body, mind, and emotions. Parang on the first element, you have red alert. And the second element, and the third element, you have almost the opposite, which is numbness, no? Walang pakiramdam, para kang robot in a trance and fearful to go to different places, fearful to do things. So our lives become constricted. It's called constriction. Now, interestingly, in children, for example, the effect is on the body, mind, and feelings. And the numbing is very interesting because children, for example, I had the case of two children, boy and a girl, 9 and 7, who were brought to me for play therapy because they were abused. But I didn't know the entire story then. What happened was, during my many decades of practicing play therapy, the children always play during the hour because I always provide safe and conducive atmosphere for play, and children naturally play. It's their natural way of being. It's their language is play. So the two children sat there, and for the whole hour of my play therapy session, for the first time in my entire practice, they did not move, they did not play. So one result is that children who naturally play cannot play because of trauma. No, they become numb. They cannot play. Remember that play is their natural way of being, and so they cannot do the natural way. It's not natural anymore. They become powerless. We become powerless, not just children, but all people who are traumatized. I'm sure you have heard of Maya Angelou, the poet, the renowned poet, phenomenal woman. When she was 6 years old, I think, when she was 6 years old, she was raped by the boyfriend of her mother, and she was able to give the name of the rapist, and the rapist was imprisoned and killed. So she thought that her words killed the man. So she did not speak for 6 years. So in children, it can be, they cannot play, they cannot talk. So that's interesting to see. That is different also in children because they are powerless, and the natural way they are, they do play and talk are affected. Okay, the next slide is on the stages of recovery. So if there is trauma, fortunately, there's recovery or healing. This is mentioned as already by the previous speakers, but they have been very, very enlightening and educational and really informative. Thank you to the two speakers. The 3 stages of recovery. First of all is establishing safety. This was mentioned before. Feeling physical and psychological safety. That's very, very important. So examples were given. Even the rescue operations were not safe because they were separated from the parents. All these things. So safety is essential before you can even do your therapy. Okay. And then the second is all very basic, and then I'll say about more specifically for children. The second basic stage of recovery is called remembrance and mourning, which is you tell your story in the way you want it, with your own words, without being questioned and without being judged. That's very, very important. When the child or the adult tells a story of trauma, they should not be asked questions like, for example, the worst thing you can do to a person who was raped is to ask that question, to ask that woman the question, why were you wearing shorts? That's the worst thing you can do because you're distorting it and you're putting the blame on the victim and not on the perpetrator. The rape was caused by the rapist, okay? Whatever the person was wearing, the child was wearing, or the woman was wearing, the action of rape was done by the rapist. We have to establish that because many victims, survivors are made to feel guilty by people who try to help them recover. So very clear, the action was done by the perpetrator, not the victim. Okay. The third important, by the way, in telling your story through play and the arts, children used to play, as I mentioned in my story, in my example, they could play, and then the arts, dancing, singing, writing, and drama. They use a lot of that to tell their story too. It's very, very important to find meaning and for them to be able to tell the story. Why? Because trauma is overwhelming. It disempowers the person. When you tell your story through play, you act it out, you play it out, you draw it, you sing it. What you do is you empower the person, because when you go inside, when you through the arts and play, you go inside the person and bring out what's inside to the outside world and impose it on the outside world, which is originally overpowering the person. So telling the story through play, the arts, whatever means, is essential, because then you reverse the overwhelming feeling by being empowered through telling your own story and imposing it on the outside world. That's very, very empowering. Okay. So, and then also finding meaning in what happened from some people is also important. The third one is very important, and I'll talk about this in the last slide about the Filipino. The third way of recovering is to reconnect with the community, to reconnect with people, because trauma isolates. I think you know what I mean, isolates. And so it's so important that the traumatized person, the child or the adult, reconnects with a parent, with a support system, with a psychologist, with a social worker, a friend, whoever. There's got to be a support system. You cannot do trauma therapy alone, even if you're a therapist, but also the traumatized child must not be alone. I'll highlight that in the last slide. Okay. Before we go to the topic of complex trauma, let me share with you some words about trauma, that guidelines that I have formulated in my book, The Path to Healing, which is about family violence and resilience and abuse factors, and also in this other book called Presence, which is a primer on trauma and recovery for the use of trauma workers, which is my second book on trauma. Okay, what I just want to say are some guidelines, maybe just some words about trauma. First, no one is immune to trauma. No matter how good you are, how much you have achieved, how wonderful you are, you can still be traumatized. So let us destigmatize it. People are not just weak or whatever, because they're traumatized because of weak. No, any person, strong, solid, whatever, achiever, can be traumatized. Because I believe that trauma is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. And as was mentioned earlier by Dr. Karim, the abnormal situation is overwhelming. Okay. The second is interesting. I call it trauma is contagious. I like to highlight this. It's not naman nakakahawa, but VT, vicarious traumatization. When you are helping somebody who's traumatized, make sure you know that you are also traumatized. Even if we are not in the picture, for example, Yolanda pictures, TV images that were shown, we were nationally traumatized, even if we were not in Yolanda, no, in Leyte, Tacloban. So the VT is important to recognize vicarious traumatization. The person who is helping the traumatized survivor can also be traumatized. So if we have helped traumatized journalists, traumatized documenters of EJK, etc. They were not the ones killed. The family was killed, but they're traumatized by just documenting. So it's contagious in that way, vicarious traumatization. Okay, unresolved or unprocessed trauma can lead to negative consequences. You don't have to, we'll elaborate on that later because that has been mentioned already. In other words, it's important to process trauma. Sometimes it stays there and it goes from generation to generation, never processed, affecting generations. No? Okay, so we also must realize that trauma overwhelms the human system. As I said, we're not immune. No? Makes us feel powerless. I think we have seen that already in the past presentations. And then there is what you call victim stance, when a person tends to kind of like repeat the trauma, seeking abusive relationships that seem irrational, but maybe it's what you call the comfort zone or something you've experienced and you seek it. No? So it's like can repeat the trauma by being having a stance of a comfort zone of being victimized all the time. Important that there is a need to validate that pain, that depression, and That's a real and normal. Huwag mo sabihing wala lang yan, sandali lang yan, mawawala yan. That doesn't work. That's not helpful. The important thing is to validate. The pain is valid. It is real. Don't trivialize it. It is real, and validating it helps the person who feels it feel that she is okay in feeling that pain and that depression. No? And the person is not feeling there's something wrong with her for feeling that way, because you validate the feeling. Validating is one of the best ways to empower and build self-worth and strengthen the self. So validating. And then pain that is acknowledged dissipates in time. Pain that is denied stays on, and the person gets stuck and cannot move forward. That's the paradox of pain. I think we know that in all psychotherapy. We have to acknowledge the pain. Sometimes when we are the ones dealing with the pain of another person, it's difficult for us to acknowledge it because our own unresolved pain is still inside us, and we cannot face the pain of the person we're helping because we have not faced and acknowledged our own pain. Okay, so people deny, accept, and go through the mourning process at their own pace. Respect their pace. Not everybody goes at the same pace. That's very important, because in the work I'm doing with the ina na nila sa anak who lost their children, some will say, well, how come she's already okay? I'm not yet okay. No, you are okay because you have your own pace, and it's okay to not be the same as others in the grieving process or in the mourning process. Okay, finding meaning in the painful event is necessary for one to recover and to move forward. And many people have said that. I can give examples later if there are questions. Rituals. This is very important because sometimes people laugh at our rituals, but I think our rituals of community, family, and our culture very helpful and often necessary. For example, death in the family, sudden traumatic death. We tell the story again and again. We cry, we laugh, we eat together. These are rituals that are important, and I can say this very clearly because I attended a ritual in a Western culture, and we couldn't talk, we couldn't laugh, we couldn't cry. It was just, you have to be so poised. But I think let's not copy that. Let's not think that our culture is wrong for having such rituals as talking, crying, eating, etc. I think these are important rituals. Let's export them to the Western world, where you have to be always composed and not feeling. And I think that's very difficult. Okay, the first thing to do is just be there with the person. Listen to her story without judgment. Listening can be magical. When you listen to a person with all your heart and soul, and you are really listening, you're giving a very important subliminal message to that person. And that message is that you matter. You are important. And listening to you, you are not nothing. So it's very important that we know how to listen, especially to traumatized people, and without judgment. That is their story, not yours. So listen to the story as the way she remembers it, the way she says it, and the way she feels about it. That is her story. Okay, don't think that, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Which is very common. Okay, we know this. Empathize, accompany the person, and never trivialize feelings. Parang ganyan, bali wala lang yan, wala din yan, mga ganon. Those are not helpful ways of helping people, no? And another very important thing, two more, be aware when you're helping, be aware of your own vulnerability as a helper, your own issues, and own them. Remember, your issues will be triggered when you're helping a person who's traumatized. When your unresolved trauma is still there, it is triggered, and you might project it to the person you are helping. So be mindful. Mindfulness means looking inside and looking at, being aware of what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what your body is feeling, and owning it so you don't project it to the other person. Okay, and the last one I'd say is develop burnout strategies. These are for people who are helping people who are traumatized. Take care of yourself. Okay, now let's go to what is complex trauma. It's a child's exposure to multiple traumatic events, often of invasive and interpersonal nature. Okay, which has wide, long-ranging effect. Example lang, very brief example. Let's say yung grandmother who's old and sick dies, I'm not saying that's not painful, but that can be a simple trauma that and a grieving that you do in a normal grieving. But when you are abused, let's say by a family member, many years, different times of the year, etc., and you're violated, and it's your person that's violated and invaded, it has wide-ranging and long-term effects. That is complex trauma. Severe and pervasive. Neglect, profound neglect, abandonment, domestic violence, torture, kidnapping, slavery, or being a prisoner of war. So I would like to put in the term developmental trauma. I think developmental trauma is something we have to look at. No? Let me go first to the impact of complex trauma. Okay. I think this has been mentioned. Feeling of worthlessness, shame, and guilt, affect dysregulation. Very important. The problem of controlling our emotions. Emotions are very intense and it's very difficult to regulate as it is. But when you're traumatized, you are really dysregulating. It's very difficult to regulate your affect, your emotions. Okay. Finding it hard to feel connected. You're numb. You're like a robot. Feel disconnected with people. And it's very important for the person dealing with a traumatized survivor to first connect somehow by being there, by listening, by your words, by your facial expression, your body language, you can connect. If you don't connect with the person, you cannot even start the recovery or healing, okay? So they find it hard to feel connected. So your first task is to connect, okay? And having trouble with interpersonal relationships, like keeping friends, partners, etc. That's interesting. Disturbed concentration and attention, we know that, which has been already mentioned. A change in perspective or view of the world. We have to say that, for example, all men are bad. I mean, you don't never do this thing anymore. It's like it changes your view of the world. And this is very important because when you grow up, you have children, you have certain view of the world, that men are bad, that you cannot trust people, the world is, you cannot trust anybody. You can carry that perspective until you get older, have children, and from generation to generation, that perspective is held true. So that's very important to recognize that there's a change in the perspective when a person is traumatized, okay, the view of the world. I just want to put this in from my own example, from my own experience lately as an 80-year-old woman working for 50 years with people. I just want to say that the complex trauma is somewhat associated with the possible diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, which is a very big explanation. But if you ask questions, I'll explain it. But it's one of the most difficult disorders to treat for any professional. Okay, so taking it from that, we now talk about developmental trauma, which developmental trauma, so it connotes from childhood, stages of development affected, and trauma happens early. And what happens is, as I said, if it's not resolved, there's no healing, it becomes an important issue in a country, in the world, because then it's transgenerational or intergenerational trauma. So repeated from generation to generation and generation onwards, and may never heal. Okay, and of course, I just want to mention ACEs. We all know that adverse childhood experiences are now being recognized in the field of psychotherapy as not somewhat neglected as factors in diagnosing mental disorders at present. No? So it's not yet so discussed. There could be a proposal to the PAP or APA or whatever organization can look at it, that we need to look at developmental trauma and the impact on from generation to generation onwards. And it becomes a real public health issue. Okay, let's go to the strategies for recovery and healing. I have only 10 slides, so it's not going to be long. I'd like to introduce PMBEAT, in MLAC, Mindfulness Lab, the institute I founded, we found that for children especially, but also for adults, one of the most effective strategies for recovery or healing is, we call it PMB, play and mindfulness-based expressive arts therapy. So for children who are traumatized, as you saw in my example, they couldn't play. And when we proceeded with more sessions, they were able to play and they started to recover. Arts also, as I said, mindfulness-based arts therapy. Arts therapy, as I explained already, when you bring out what's inside you, sometimes words are not enough, especially for children, to describe the pain. So they draw, and some children draw, different violent acts, etc. You will see in the drawing, or you will see in some older children in the center would write letters, would write stories and poems or songs, which is a very natural way of expressing deep emotion that is not expressed that is difficult to be expressed like with words. Okay. Yes. So important to look at the natural way. We are also natural way for Filipinos. We are not so articulate in terms of words, but we can use drama, play, dance, music, art, etc. So I think we should explore those recovery strategies. And of course, best treatment is psychotherapy by a trauma-trained therapists who can use different modalities. And there is what you call the cognitive processing therapy, CPT, which is a very structured 12-week program where you evaluate the changes, the upsetting thoughts and the beliefs of the person. So it's cognitive. And then dialectic behavioral therapy is very prominent now, DBT. It is dialectic behavioral therapy, dialectical, because you challenge, you accept, but you challenge. Dialectic behavior therapy or dialectical behavior therapy has 4 elements. The DIME, call it DIME, no? The mnemonic, whatever you call it, is DIME, meaning D for is stress tolerance, I is interpersonal effectiveness, M is mindfulness, and E is emotion regulation. So DIME, 4 elements of dialectic behavioral therapy used in trauma therapy, and especially repeated traumatization that can lead to personality disorder. Of course, body movement and EMDR, but I think for me, EMDR is not so, it's maybe for my own experience only for maybe not complex and not repeated trauma, maybe one big trauma. So I'd like to put it there. And then the last slide is the Filipino way. Okay, remember in the recovery, the last stage I mentioned is connection, seeking connection. So when we are traumatized, we are alone, we feel the only one that's suffering. So it's so important to build a caring community. And this is our Filipino way. We are a collective culture. Let's use it, no? Sense of belonging, knowing that there are people around you who care, bringing together resources in the community, people who can help, relatives, friends, community people, bring the resources together so that there's ongoing emotional and physical support. And the famous saying, hindi ka nag-iisa, walang iwanan, tulungan tayo. And I'd like to not neglect mentioning in my work with trauma that many people who are recovering spiritual, the aspect of spirituality is important. Sinasabi nila, nitiwala kami sa Diyos at sa kapwa-tao. So the need for support group and building a caring community is our Filipino way, and let's use it to the utmost. I will end there, and thank you for.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Hani, for your wonderful sharing. Just before we let you go, Tita Hani, may you tell our audience you've mentioned your books. May you tell their audience where maybe they can find or buy your books, Dr. Hani?
Yeah. I think maybe our Facebook, MLAC Facebook, MLAC.institute, I think.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I hope you have taken in as much knowledge as you can. We will just address one question for each speaker, and maybe we won't have a lot of time for an open forum, but we've tried to filter the questions that came in. So maybe each speaker could have maybe a minute to answer the questions that are given to them. So may I call back to this Zoom room our resource persons, Attorney Liza Alamia, Dr. Karing Taroja, and Dr. Hani Karandang. May you please come back and join us. So I'll address one question to each of the speakers. I want to start with Attorney Alamia. So the question is from an anonymous attendee. They said the BARM is said to have no accredited adoption facilities for displaced orphan children. What is the current status of these children, and how does BARM address this situation?
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, that is true. There is no accredited orphanage or shelter in the BARM, but there are a number of in-center support institutions that are being provided by non-government organizations and private organizations, including faith-based organizations like Islamic organizations that provide humanitarian services, including services for our orphans. Now, given the autonomy of BARM and the unique governance in the BARM, our accreditation system needs further streamlining. Also, just like to inform everyone that adoption is allowed in Islam. However, there are certain rules like changing the family name of the adopted child that is not allowed. And I think that is one of the reasons why we don't have formal adoption facilities yet in the region, because we still have to process that and come up with some legislative initiatives. And speaking about legislative initiatives, for example, there's a range of interventions being provided by our Ministry of Social Services and Development for orphans, foundlings, abandoned, and surrendered children. And based on the agency's report, this include what we call the KUPCOP program, which provides financial assistance for poor and vulnerable orphans. And the MSSD also provides subsidies for orphanages that pass the licensing and accreditation process. And there is a pending, there are 3 pending legislative initiatives in the regional parliament. One of them is a bill that I have filed, which is the the social and economic reparation and benefit initiatives for orphans of war. The target here is for the orphans of war. And then there's also the institutionalization of support and establishment of orphanages. So in the coming years, hopefully, inshallah, this would be set up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Attorney Alamia. The next question I'd like to direct to Dr. Taroja. So the question is from Christian. How can technology and digital platforms be leveraged to provide accessible resources and support for children dealing with stress and trauma?
Okay, thank you, Christian, for the question, and Lala. I think I mentioned a while ago that Dr. Hani mentioned about the importance of safety. So I'd like to highlight the importance of what we call digital safety as well. So and how do we establish digital safety? So it's actually like supervised use of the platform. I know it's very difficult for many parents how to monitor and how to supervise their children in the use of the digital technology, but they have to, number one, they have to be knowledgeable about this. Sometimes many children are more knowledgeable about, are more techy than their parents, but I think the parents, they really have to know what their children are doing, and they can only monitor them when they know what's happening there. So the safety of the digital safety, issue of privacy, confidentiality, sometimes we don't know that our own technology really have mechanisms to establish the safety. So I would really short answer there is supervise use of supervise and monitoring of the use of all this technology, and know what the resources are out there, the benefits of the resources, and also be aware of the risks, which are a lot. And we as parents and adults have to be informed about them so that we can guide our children in the use of the technology and establish what I call digital safety.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Taroja. And last but not least, the final question to Dr. Carandang. There's a question here about how can families and communities be mobilized to create a supportive environment for children experiencing stress and trauma?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I think we're still in the stage of advocacy. So one is doing this forum. I think we should continue with the awareness. We're still in the awareness stage in terms of this issue. So use of social media, post awareness, but not careful about posting. But your posting must just focus on awareness and the need to discuss. Have more conversations like this. Have more forum, and have more talking about it, so that you destigmatize it and that you make people more aware. I think that's where we are right now. Other things will happen later, but let's focus on what is needed at this point, which is talking about it and being comfortable talking about it, so that it's not stigmatized, and that we are able to talk about it freely and openly, and that it's encouraged that we talk about it and mention whatever is related to this issue. I think that's the first thing we do. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Carandang, and thank you very much to our speakers. 2 hours is not enough. We should have a whole day for the 3 of them. But thank you again. And now let's hear the synthesis from the session chair, Dr. Karing Taroja.
Thank you again, Lala. It's very difficult to do the synthesis as I was listening, but very briefly, session 4 of the Ako Para sa Bata conference this year highlighted the trauma and stress experience of children in different contexts. Okay, Attorney Alamia gave us the context of the experiences of children in armed conflict, particularly in the Bangsamoro children. There were a lot of things that she shared. Okay, he talked about the impact of the clan war, how political situation also impact the children, and how the different and then he did talk about intergenerational trauma as well, and how all of this contributed to the experience of trauma and stress of children. And many of this maybe we're hearing for the first time, or we're not fully aware of the experiences of the children. And then I shared about the OSAEC experience, online sexual abuse or exploitation of children. And maybe just to highlight, I'd like to thank Gian for sharing her experiences, because that really actually gave us like the picture of an OSAIC survivor. When I talk about shame, as Gian mentioned, when he talked about the confusion as well, when she talked about how important the support of the family and the social workers is. So OSAEC, hearing from Gian, there is as Lala pointed out a while ago, so sort of victory, okay, and then maybe a healing, maybe the proper word. And then of course we learned a lot of things from Dr. Carandang when she mentioned about the complex trauma, how it is actually felt, body, mind, and feelings, and then how we can go into the recovery. And the words of Dr. Carandang in terms of the trauma, I think she highlighted our important role as maybe facilitator for healing, the issue of vicarious traumatizations, and then that we need to be mindful of our own experience of pain, And then Dr. Honey highlighted both complex trauma as severe and pervasive, and the experience of children in armed conflict and OSAEC are examples of this complex trauma. But she did talk about developmental trauma as well, which is something that we can look into, and then there were many things that we can do. And at the end, she mentioned the Filipino way, how our tiwala sa Diyos, tiwala sa kapwa-tao can also be like instruments in helping children who are experiencing trauma. So I'd like to thank Attorney Alamiha, and then Attorney and Doc Honey, Gian, of course, Lala and Jason. There's so much knowledge and wisdom in this particular session of complex trauma. So that's how I would like to synthesize the session 4, that we can do something about this to help children, not only in the prevention, but in the healing. And there are so many different ways we can do it wherever we are. And we, in the experience of trauma, safety is very important. Physical safety, emotional safety, and of course, digital safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again to our resource persons, Attorney Liza Lamia, Dr. Karing Taroja, and Dr. Hani Karandang, and of course to Gian. Let's end this session with a self-care activity. As I mentioned earlier, most of us have a lot in our minds. It can feel like we have so many things to do and so many things to keep track of. Maybe there are worries or problems in your mind too. If you feel like this, it's time to stress less. Slowing down to be mindful can help. Being mindful is having your mind on what you are doing. You do one thing at a time and focus on what you're doing in a calm way. If you are with your child, workmates, or family right now, invite them to watch and follow the simple mindfulness exercise on Get Back on Track.
Get back on track. Sometimes you can get off track, feel unsettled, or feel out of balance. But with practice, you can change that. Let's give it a try. Stand up. Can you feel your feet solid on the ground? You're standing. Notice that. Heavy, steady, tall. Let's get a little off center, a little off track. Tilt your head to one side, then the other, side to side. Don't get yourself dizzy. Pause if you do. You will go off center with each tilt. Side to side, side to side, and side to side. Pause. Now find your center. Get back on track. This time, add your shoulders. Sway your upper body as well as your head. Side to side, side to side, and side to side. Slow down. Pause. Find center again. Get back on track. Maybe do one more set of side to sides with your whole body. Sway, side to side, side to side, and side to side. Pause. Find your center. Your whole body was off track, off balance. Now you've returned yourself to center, back on track, back to balance. With your body in control and at center, notice what you feel from the inside. Maybe you feel a little calm, more in control, on track. Settle in there. Breathe in and so slowly out. Next time you feel off track, out of balance, try tilting your head side to side once or twice and see if you can get back to center, your center. Then in that very moment, settle in there. Breathe in and out.
Thank you very much to everyone for participating. You can do this mindfulness exercise regularly. Muli, ako si Lala Balahadia Alcala. Ako, tayo para sa bata.